He sat in his car for 45 minutes, not because anything went wrong, but because everything had gone exactly right. He'd spent 31 years building his company. He started with a handshake out of his garage and grew it into something with a name that people respected, a payroll that fed, a reputation that he'd earned the hard way through the blood, sweat, and tears and sacrifice that it takes to build an organization of that size for 3 continuous decades. And that morning, it was a Tuesday. He told me later on, like he had handed the business over to his son, who he knew was completely capable, having worked inside the organization for quite some time. And yet, the founder, sitting across from me at the table, still questioned whether he did everything right, whether he said everything right. He had walked out of that office as a free man, and then he sat in the parking lot. He told me that he didn't shed a tear, he wasn't crying. However, the surprising note for him was that he wasn't relieved either. He said it was more like he didn't recognize the quiet. For 31 years, his phone had rang for a reason. People had needed him, decisions waited on him, the business moved because he moved it. And in that parking lot, for the first time in 3 decades, nothing needed him. He thought he was prepared for that morning. He'd planned this exit for years. He hired the right advisors. He had built value inside the company over the course of several years so that it was able to transfer at maximum profitability, done it all the ways you're supposed to do it. Nobody told him to prepare for the version of grief that shows up when everything goes right, even amidst an incredible personal succession plan. That's what it was, grief. He just didn't have the word for it yet. It wasn't failure, it wasn't regret, it wasn't even really sadness yet, not the kind that you'd recognize like at a funeral. It was the death of a version of himself, the one who had built something, the one people called first, the one who knew with total clarity exactly who he was because the company told him. And when the company didn't need him to tell himself who he was anymore, he didn't know. And that parking lot is where this episode begins. Because if you've built something, a business, a ministry, a command, a career, and you're in close to handing it over, stepping away from it, or watching the thing that defined you go quiet, you need to know that what's waiting for you afterward has a name. It's not weakness, it's not ingratitude, it's not something a new hobby or a new title is going to fix. It's actually grief. And it deserves to be named accurately, probably for the first time.
This is the tension, the pattern you can't see. This is the moment you finally break free. Know what's running underneath before it takes you down. Welcome to the tension lab. This is your ground.
All right, welcome back to the Attention Lab. I am your host, Rudy Swigert. We are in episode number 13 of season 1, and I'm still not sure how many more episodes we're going to have inside of season 1. I'm thinking we're going to run to about 20 episodes and then shift a little bit into season 2, start having some deeper level dive conversations around instruments and contracts and all those wonderful things that set people up for transition. If we do it the right way, including the instruments and the contracts, the things that we sign, including the date on the calendar, if we're building value inside of a corporation, if we are running large companies or congregations and communicating change as early and often as possible, then we're doing our job. The piece that most of that misses, and the gap that this podcast and my company seeks to fill, is the emotional side of things, the identity side of transitions and transfer. As we steward the tension, when we let go of something that we had held on to that had been such a big part of us for so long and entered into the next season, whatever that is for you. And we all experience it. We all experience seasons of change. Some of them are planned, some of them are unplanned, and yet each season carries with it deep level. For me, sometimes it's been gratitude, it's been sadness, it's been hurt and bitterness in some areas, and nostalgic. And many things I look back over the course of many different changes and transitions that I've experienced in my life and just been super, super grateful that I was able to learn something through each and every one of those experiences. So the story that I just told you at the beginning of this episode, it's not a hypothetical. It's a real guy in a real Tuesday in a real parking lot. And I've sat across from enough leaders now to tell you that what happened to him is it's not unusual. It just goes unnamed. And that's why the statistics are so high across this country that the regret that takes place just months after a successful transfer of a business or an organization or the exit of a leader, that they say, "You know what? I kinda regretted it." It wasn't because they didn't get all the money that they thought they could get out of their organization. They absolutely got those things. All the systems, the processes, the protective instruments like contracts, insurance, everything baked into the cake, annuities, personal financial solutions, all of those wonderful things put together. What they missed in all of their planning was how it was going to feel, who they were going to be. Were they just going to be put out to pasture? Had their season of working as a high capacity leader been brought to an end? If so, that's okay. However, emotionally, sometimes we're not okay. And when we don't talk about these things, or when we don't name these things, this is where I call it stewarding the wilderness, because we enter into this age of who am I? What am I doing? What's my purpose? What's my mission? Where are my people? How can I stay connected and feeling fulfilled and valid and valued inside or outside, whatever it is that is taking place next? We're not surviving the transition. We're not skipping over the conversations about how we feel. What we're doing is we're stewarding it. If you've been following this channel for any amount of time, you know that the book is Stewarding the Tension, that I have a big just fondness for that word stewarding, because I feel like everything that we have has been given to us by the Lord. I'm a Christian, so everything comes from a Christian perspective. And because everything that I have, it's not necessarily mine. It belongs to the Lord. And the Lord, you guys, even whether you're a Christian or not, you know this saying that the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. But what that saying also recognizes is that the Lord is there throughout all of it, including the sadness, including the change, whether it's planned or unplanned. Here's what I've come to believe. After 25 years in the military and 15 years in business leadership and pastoral ministry, nearly 8 years sitting with people in counseling context, is that the season, who you were and who you're becoming, it's not a detour on the way to the real life. It is the real life. We all think that we're striving to get somewhere, and this is just par for the course, and it's part of the process. And we have to, we plan A to B, but sometimes we zigzag along that straight line. That's the real life. The journey is what it's all about. And the journey is the part that nobody's prepared you for. Maybe you went to school, got a degree. I know I did. Maybe you've got a lot of certifications behind your name. I know I do. And yet, underneath all of those things are the patterns that run in our emotional and mental well-being. And that's the part that nobody prepares us for. Nobody prepares us for the sadness. Nobody prepares us for the questions that come after the phone no longer rings. So let's talk about what that season, as we steward the wilderness, let's talk about what that actually is and what it asks of you. In scripture, the wilderness is not a punishment. It's not a detour. It is the path. Wilderness is the path. Moses didn't go straight from the burning bush to leading a nation. He spent 40 years in the wilderness first. And it wasn't because God delayed, it was because Moses himself wasn't prepared. He wasn't ready. The wilderness was where he stopped being the man who had fled Egypt and started becoming the man who could lead a people out of it. Elijah ran into the wilderness completely depleted. This is where a lot of us experience burnout, or maybe we've been let go from a previous position and we don't realize that, man, we've been running on empty for a long time and we get nudged straight into the wilderness, not in defiance. We're not pushing back on that nudge. We're just exhausted. And so God didn't meet Elijah in the wind or the earthquake or the fire. God met him in the stillness, the kind of stillness Elijah had never made room for before. And I want that to land on you in the same manner that it landed on me as I was writing the book, as I was putting these things together. Like had things not gone the way that they had for me in the past in terms of an unplanned transition and the sadness and the bitterness and the hurt that came out of it, recognize that I needed to slow down. And that nudge, that movement was actually a blessing. Every one of those stories has the same shape, and yours probably does too. Something comes to an end. There's a season of disorientation where your old identity is stripped away and the new one hasn't yet formed. The only after that season does your next chapter actually begin. The middle season, the one with no clear name, the one with no clear timeline, no map, that's the wilderness that we are also called to steward. And so here's what I want you to hear in this episode. It's not a sign that something's gone wrong in your life. It's a sign that something significant might be coming to closure, and that's okay. And that something else maybe hasn't started yet after that. In my experience, there's 3 doors that people walk through into this season. The first door is succession. This is the planned exit. This is whether you're handing over a business, whether you're exiting ministry on a high note, whether you're transitioning out of a position that you've built or created to someone else. The legal part, the contracts, it's often the easy part. It's the identity part that catches people off guard. The second is your role exit. That's the second door, whether you're walking away from a position that's defined you for years. For us in the C-suite, we are the CEO, we are the COO, we are the CMO, CFO, you pick. And then when you semi-retire, you become a fractional COO or CEO, meaning I'll go and dip into small businesses on a contracted timeline, and I'll be there as needed on a fractional basis. We still are, in our minds, the C-suite executive. So when we walk away from a position that's defined us for years, sometimes decades, right? That might be, in our previous context, we've talked about military command. We've talked about first responders. In the C-suite conversation where the title ends, the question that surfaces isn't what's next. The question is, who am I now? And we hold on to that, who we were, with the tightness of our fist. And we still talk about it in revered populations and conversations. Military and first responders, you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. Once a Marine, always a Marine. You probably finished that sentence even before I did, right? So veterans have a bond, and that's the same with first responders, and that's the same with anybody that's been in the throes of trauma voluntarily. And also, other communities of life or of vocation have these same types of bonds. Teachers, as an example, they have a bond where they all celebrate the fact that they don't get a whole lot of money or a whole lot of appreciation, and it can be a thankless vocation. Yet they come together, and there are organizations that help them process not what's next. Who am I now if I'm no longer teaching? Who am I now if I'm no longer so and so's soccer mom because I'm now an empty nester? Not who am I now if I'm not the athlete? Who am I now if I'm not the student? Who am I now if I'm not fill in the blank? That's door number 2. The third door is a calling crisis. It's the one where things are so completely disrupted when the faith and the purpose that anchored everything else goes quiet or complicated or both. This is the hardest for Christian leaders, is the calling crisis. It's the hardest for them to admit, to say out loud, because we're not supposed to admit when the calling goes silent. Now, let's be clear, the calling never leaves, but there are times that we question the calling. And I've walked through versions of all three of these things. There was a season leaving the structure of military life. I knew exactly who I was in uniform, had no idea who I was without it. I didn't have language for it at that time. I just knew something was off. I didn't know what to call it. That's usually how the wilderness announces itself, not with a name, but with an absence. And so, what do we try to do? What do we try to do when something comes to an end and we don't know which way is up? We just want to close that gap. We want to run, jump, run, don't walk, to get to that next thing. We try to skip the wilderness. And here's the is that almost nobody that I work with wants to actually be inside the wilderness, which is understandable because it's disorienting. It's sad, it's slow. And high capacity leaders are wired to move, to produce, to solve. So instead of stewarding the season, we try to skip it. Let's get our resume out there as quickly as possible. Let's call all of our friends and family. Let's see where the next opportunity is. But I want to walk through 4 ways that I've seen that happen, because you might recognize yourself in one of these. The first thing that we've seen, and if you've ever observed friends or family inside a season of the wilderness, you'll recognize some of these strategies that take place. And it's not because they want to, it's just because it's the psychology of being in the wilderness, and the sadness and the grief that we don't understand. And so we springboard into that next thing. And you'll see people reinvent themselves, myself included. I've reinvented myself probably 3 or 4 times in the last 5 years. Reinvention. That's the first issue that takes place. Sometimes it's premature. Launching the next venture, joining the next board, starting the next ministry before you've actually grieved the last one. It looks like momentum. From the outside, it looks like resilience. But what is it underneath? You might know where we're going with this. Underneath, it's avoidance, wearing the costume of ambition. The second is performance masking, staying busy enough, productive enough, available enough that the real question of who am I without this never gets enough silence to surface. This is where it comes from, not from working too hard at the new thing, but from running from the old grief. It's still there. And the third is what I call the nostalgia loop, staying tethered to the old identity through unsolicited advice. Anybody been there? Lingering control or quietly resisting the next generation's right to lead differently than you did. If you've ever handed off a business or a ministry and found yourself constantly checking in like a micromanager, maybe weighing in or offering that unsolicited advice, feeling threatened when things change, that's often this pattern. And the fourth thing that we see, and this one takes some care to say, it's spiritual bypass. This is apathy. It's using faith language to skip the grief instead of walking through it, saying things like, I'm just trusting God's plan, as a way of avoiding the actual sadness underneath. And I want to be really clear here, if at all possible, and that trusting God is not the problem. Yes, yes, we should trust God. Yes, we should trust that He has a plan. But if we're moving in that direction without processing the grief and the sadness in a manner that is healing in nature, then we're going to miss potentially a tremendous opportunity to spend time with God. Faith is not the problem. The problem is that we use spiritual language as an exit ramp around our feelings that we've decided are not allowed. I'm not allowed to feel sad. I'm not allowed to feel disoriented. I'm not allowed to feel grief or depression. We've decided that those things are not good for us. And here's the deal. Over time, if it lasts a long time, they can be not good for us, because we'll go into isolation and we'll get into unhealthy habits. So we need to pay attention to that too. So it's when we use this spiritual bypass in order to not process the feelings effectively with the Lord, that we begin to cover up, to stuff down, to not talk about, to move under the rug. The core truth underneath all of these four patterns looks like this. It's that unprocessed grief, it doesn't disappear, it goes underground. And underground, it doesn't stay quiet. It shows up in these ways. In these ways, it shows up as control. It shows up as restlessness, and you might just say you have insomnia and just write it off as that. It shows up as a sense of worth that's still entirely conditioned on what you produce, even years after the thing that used to define you is gone. So if skipping the wilderness doesn't actually work, it well. And so the word stewarding is one that says that we get to hold something and care for something in and through every season. We are stewards, good stewards of our time. We are good stewards of our finances. We handle well the things that the Lord has bestowed upon us, whether they're material or immaterial. And sometimes those things that the Lord has bestowed upon us is a time of reckoning. It's a time of sitting down and resting. So I'm going to give you what stewarding actually looks like during these seasons. And this is four practices. It's not a formula, right? It's things that I've watched the leaders who've come through this season well actually do. And so I'm a fan of observation. Where he has done things really well, I want to learn from them and spend time with them and observe and document, because I myself am often looking for ways to continue to improve in these areas, so I can then offer them out loud to you in a podcast or a resource that points you to something that may be helpful for you during these time frames. So these four practices look like this. These are things that we've learned from others over time. The first one is that we give language to the loss specifically. So it's when we get anxious or short with our temper, or we don't know exactly what's going on, and our family says, oh, they're just irritable right now, it's because we haven't given language to what it is that we're experiencing. And there's two bottom line things that are trying to protect us from experiencing those things on any deep emotional level. The two bottom line things that are protective in nature are fear and sadness. Fear will stall us from moving forward at all. If we're scared, if we're fearful of something, then we're trying to protect it with all of our actions. And that might mean that the opposite side of health and wellness is needing to take control, even when we have no control or capacity to control those things. And sadness is the same. We don't like to feel sad. We don't like to grieve. You know, we like to rub some dirt on it and keep moving. Ever since we were a kid, we were told not to cry or else they'd give us something to cry about. We were told to walk through adversity, limping if need be, but moving forward. I'm reminded of the time on the Little League baseball field where not even Little League, it may have been T-ball or something like that, where, you know, the kid hits the ball and he's running towards first base and he falls really hard and hurts himself really bad. And the parents and the coaches, they want to encourage him. They say, walk it off, walk. And you can see the kids stand up, just, you know, fighting back tears and limping and moving towards first base, and everybody's cheering, you know, but inside they're hurting. They're sad. They're maybe embarrassed. And yet they're not allowed to show those things outwardly because, you know, our culture doesn't want to celebrate or talk about those things or spend any time there. And then people want to move towards fixing, rub dirt on it. That's a fix. Don't cry because it's okay. Well, it's also okay to cry. And we don't communicate that either. So we're going to name the loss out loud if you can to someone, not just to yourself. What am I losing in this transition? Not things are different now, not, you know, some high level, you know, thing that is ambiguous. We want to name something specific. I lost the thing that made people call me first. That's specific. I lost being the one with the answer and feeling valued. That's specific. I lost knowing exactly who I was when I walked into a room. That is specific. Specificity is what makes grief move. Vagueness stays stuck. And so we want to name the loss. And because named loss starts to shift. The second practice is I want you to resist the urge to recreate immediately. And we're just going to add some caveats to this because I don't want to be misunderstood here, right? Sitting in the wilderness is not the same as staying there. And there's a difference between necessary reflection and prolonged avoidance dressed up as healing. So be careful with that. Most leaders I work with don't have a staying too long problem. We just want to get it behind us and move into the next season, which is great. We're capable. We can do those things. They have a leaving too soon problem because they just end up messing up the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. Give the season more time than feels comfortable, less time than feels endless. So the third is that we're going to find someone who won't rush your resolution, someone that will just sit and hold space with you, and that's okay. And that might be a counselor. For me, that was a spiritual director who just said, hey, we're just going to sit with this and we're going to listen and we're going to move in a direction that the Lord calls us to move into. But we're not going to rush. We're not in a rush. If financial is not an issue, then you have no reason to rush. If financial constraint is an issue, then you want to pay attention to that and move into the next thing, whether it's a stepping stone or something else. But then also take the time to grieve, to sit in the loss. So even if you do jump into the next job because you got to pay the bills, which makes absolute sense, make sure you build in time with your therapist or your counselor, with your trusted friends or your spiritual director, and spend time grieving because it still has to happen. This sitting with someone who won't rush your resolution is harder than it sounds. Right? Even with people that love you, right? They'll try to fix this very quickly, not because they don't care, but because they don't want you to continue in your sadness because of what we talked about before. Sitting with someone else's grief is uncomfortable for most people, even unintentionally. They'll try to talk you out of being sad to make the discomfort stop. Why? Because they care. They care. We want the discomfort to stop. And then lastly, let the next identity emerge slowly. I don't want you to force it. I don't want you to try to put a square peg in a round hole or a round peg in a square hole. Right? In the work that I do with leaders, we eventually build what I call an identity declaration. It's a written articulation of who you're becoming, rooted in character, rather than your title, rooted in a legacy rather than a position, right? But that document only means something if it emerges at the end of real wilderness work. If you try to write it on day one, it's just a wish list. If you write it after the work, it's true. So here's the distinction that I want to leave you with from this episode is that there's two kinds of leaders who come through a season like this. And the first kind will survive it. They get through, they rebuild something that looks like the old thing. They find a new title, a new platform, a new way to stay busy. From the outside, they look fine, and by most measures, they are. But underneath the fine, something never is quite resolved. There's a restlessness that doesn't have a clear source. There's no language for it. There's a drive that still seems tied to proving something to somebody. There's a sense of worth that's still entirely conditioned on output. The second kind of leader does what I've been calling steward. They steward it. They let the wilderness do its actual work. And this can take a couple of years. So don't rush it. Let the wilderness do its actual work. Name the loss. They don't want to rebuild too fast. They find someone steady enough to sit with them in it, have conversations around it, hold space for each other, which is so good, so healing. And they come out on the other side knowing something that the first group never quite learns. And so who you are was never what you built. And I hope that that resonates with you. Who you are wasn't about the work of your hands. It was never what you built. And the season that felt like it was taking everything from you was actually clearing the ground for something that could actually last. And so I want to mention just a couple more things and we'll come to an end on this episode. If what I've described today feels familiar, if you're in the middle of maybe succession planning, or you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, maybe you've recently stepped away from a role that defined you, or your sense of calling has gone quiet. I do this work directly with just a small number in Stewarding the Wilderness. It's a private cohort built around exactly what we've talked about today. And if you want to experience more of this kind of teaching or this kind of information with space for real questions, we're going to be hosting some events coming up as well. Keep an eye on this channel. Keep an eye on some links. We'll be sharing more about stewarding the wilderness. We're going to put together some master classes and some more cohorts surrounding these actual things. But I want to leave you with a question that I ask every leader who sits across from me during this season. And the question is, and if you can answer nothing else today, just answer this one, is what have you lost that you haven't given yourself permission to call a loss? And you don't have to answer that today. You don't have to put it down too quickly either, right? The leaders who are willing to sit with that question, really spend time with it, are almost always the ones who find their way through to something worth having on the other side. Lastly, what have you lost that you've never given yourself permission to call a loss? I am your host, Rudy Swigert. This is the Tension Lab, and I look forward to checking in with you on the next one.
This is the tension, the pattern you can't see. This is the moment you finally break free. Know what's running